Hello, hello, and welcome to the introductory episode of a podcast that we have called the Casual Metal Podcast. My name is Daniel Terry, and with me co-hosting this is Bryan Patton.
Hello, hello.
You might know me and Bryan from stuff. You might not. It really just depends on what circles that you're in. I do YouTube videos whenever I have time under the moniker of DFT's Dungeon. And Bryan hosts a podcast, a multiple episodes per week podcast called As the Story Grows. And so I kind of wanted to get back to doing a weekly podcast because I used to do a podcast every week called Discography Discussion, which was a really difficult podcast to do. I had Bryan on there several times as a guest, and there was always a lot of homework there where we would have to, I'd be like, okay, Bryan, next week we're talking about, you name a band, and you need to listen to all of the albums that band put out, and then we're going to talk about it for 1 to 3 hours. And, I haven't done that format in a long time. And so I thought that it would be a really fun thing to get together and have a more casual conversation about a record of about 30 minutes or so. And I couldn't think of anybody that I disagree with on things more that I'm still civil with than Bryan. So Bryan, why don't you give us a little bit of background on how you got into doing online content creation?
I mean, I started an online zine interviewing bands when I was like 16. X Alive is Dead X.
Nice.
.com.
Is it still there?
No, it is not still there.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I just kind of fell in love with podcasting as a vehicle for doing something when it first became a thing, and was lucky enough to meet Travis when I lived in Philadelphia and edit As the Story Grows. And then when he decided he was done hosting the show, he gave it to me. And that's been 6 or 7 years now that I've been the host, which is crazy. And I think in that time, I've earned my metal bona fides to say I can be here on the Casual Metal Podcast.
Absolutely. I think the barrier to entry is like, have you embarrassed yourself online enough, in front of other people? Yeah. And, I don't know if I go back that far. I definitely did my own zine back in, I think, like 2005. It was like a Christian music, magazine. And obviously then, Discography Discussion was the next big thing. And then I kind of moved over to DFT's Dungeon and started doing YouTube and all that. And what this podcast is really for people that were fans of stuff like Discography Discussion and like having kind of a more casual off the cuff talk about music instead of it being heavily scripted and heavily edited like my other stuff. So I thought that this would be fun to get together with Bryan on a regular basis, pick an album and talk about it. And so That's basically all there is to this. It's only like a little 5-minute intro video just to introduce you to us and what we're about. One thing I will say is this: whenever we say casual, we mean that in every sense of the word, meaning that like we will wildly go from talking about Metallica one week to talking about like maybe some underground band that nobody's heard that plays a much more like underground style. We pretty much will give all the subgenres a try, I think at some point, depending on how long the podcast runs. And so I would not come into this podcast with any expectation week to week of like what genre we're going to focus on. I think we picked an album that we were both really into for the first episode, which we'll get into really as soon as we're done recording this little 5-minute thing. And that's been about 5 minutes. So hopefully that was compelling enough if you weren't sure about the show, whether you want to check it out or not. But make sure to check out our very first episode, which is us talking about Metallica's Kill 'Em All. See you then.